When people think of Archie Comics these days, I would assume most, if not all, would think of Archie and his band of high schoolers and the many teen comedy adventures they find themselves on. But before they became Archie Comics, they were known as MLJ magazines. And they did not in fact publish comedy stories about teenagers and wacky adventures, but told stories in the new and booming genre of superheroes. Most notably, the patriotic superhero The Shield, which most would now compare to Captain America, but was actually created over a year prior to that. Over this time, MLJ also introduced readers to other superheroes, such as the Black Hood and the Hangman. As the superhero boom died out, MLJ stopped publishing these characters and transitioned their focus to the much more popular Archie characters, as well as comics of a similar vein, and even changed their name to Archie Comics. But Archie Comics has never been quite willing to give up on their superhero characters and made several attempts to bring them back, usually under the Red Circle banner, most notably in the Silver Age, when they introduced new characters, the Fly in particular. None have ever really taken off, but it seems around every 10 years they would make another go at bringing the characters back. In 1991, after multiple failed attempts to bring back the characters, Archie tried a new strategy and licensed the characters out to DC Comics, who created the Impact imprint, which featured reimagining of several Archie Comics superheroes attempting to appeal to modern-day audiences. The line was short-lived, launching in 1991, but fizzling out in 1993 after low sales. And Impact Comics has been largely resigned since then to the annals of DC history, but most fans, if they remember Impact Comics at all, remember it as a failed attempt by DC to launch a new imprint. What most don't remember, or never knew, is that was not DC Comics' only attempt to use the MLJ superheroes. For in 2009, DC Comics launched a second attempt, this one much more ambitious than the first one, but sadly, one destined to an even quicker demise and to become even more forgotten. Despite Impact Comics being short-lived and mostly forgotten even by 2009, someone in DC saw something in the characters, because DC once more acquired the rights to the Archie superheroes, and this time they would be launching with a much smaller number of books than the first time, but with much higher ambitions. First, they acquired famed writer J. Michael Straczynski, best known for creating and running the show Babylon 5, along with being one of the rare showrunners to write the vast majority of the episodes himself. So DC was willing this time to bring in a high-priced talent into the fold. Also, this time the characters would not be resigned to their own imprint. This time the Archie heroes would be reimagined and inserted into the main DC Comics continuity, which it turned out mostly, but not completely, meant that their books would reference events and guest star other heroes from the main DC universe, but would ultimately have little impact into the main DC universe themselves, but more on that later. Originally, the characters were set to debut in the pages of The Brave and the Bold, an ongoing team-up book out at the time, and would feature the Shield, the Fly, and Black Hood, reimagined as heroes of the modern DC universe, teaming up with current DC heroes. However, after initially announcing these plans, DC Comics decided they would rather use those issues to introduce milestone characters into the main DC universe, and the plans to use that series to introduce the Archie superheroes was scrapped. What DC ended up doing instead was they would launch 4 one-shots, known collectively as the Red Circle, a callback to the imprint name often used by Archie, and introduce the heroes of these books. The one-shots consisted of the Shield, a soldier who after being injured in the line of fire, merged with a high-tech suit to become a sort of super soldier sent on the toughest missions for the US military. Inferno, a man who wakes up with amnesia not knowing who he is, but possessing the power to emit and control flames, while somehow changing his physical appearance in the process, who finds himself on the run for both the FBI and a mysterious group looking to capture him. The Web, a spoiled rich playboy who dons a high-tech suit and uses the internet to help seek out people in trouble and find out where he's needed. And the Hangman, a Civil War doctor who was unfairly hanged and now finds himself immortal and living in the modern day as a doctor by day, but at night transforms into a powerful vigilante who seeks out helping the innocent and punishing the guilty. All 4 of these titles were written by Straczynski. After the 4 one-shots were published, DC continued the characters' adventures in 2 different books. The Shield, which featured Inferno as a backup feature, and then eventually switched over to having a new character called the Fox as a backup feature, another character reimagined from Archie Comics. And the Web, which featured the Hangman as a backup feature, and unlike the Shield, remained the backup feature throughout the series run. None of these books were actually written by Straczynski, instead having different writers. As I mentioned before, both of these books were set in the main DC universe, and that was apparent if you read them. Honestly, in my opinion, I think they tried a little too hard to bring in guest stars and give callbacks, and possibly overdid it, especially in The Shield. The Shield not only got the most appearances outside of the Red Circle titles, appearing in a cameo in Green Arrow Black Canary, which actually was the character's first appearance as it came out before his one-shot, as well as appeared in 3 issues of another short-lived DC Comics series, Magog, and a brief appearance in Wonder Woman. But his own stories featured several guest stars, including the Chinese superhero team Great 10, Magog, who appeared in his book, and the Justice Society. The rest had little presence outside of the Red Circle comic books, but the Web, in his alter ego of John Raymond, did appear in an issue of Action Comics, as well as Oracle and the current Batgirl Stephanie Brown making appearances in the Web. The Hangman backups also featured appearances by the Golden Age Sandman. In a flashback scene, Green Arrow and Black Canary also made a brief appearance in an Inferno backup story. Several Archie superheroes were also reimagined as guest stars in the various character stories. New versions of the Jaguar and Steel Surling appeared in the Shield stories, as well as a new version of the Comet appeared in an Inferno backup story. And over in the Web encountered new versions of War Eagle and Fly Girl. Originally the partner of the Archie comic character The Fly, but in this version a solo hero, as The Fly was never introduced or mentioned this time. For my money, I found the Web to be the better book. Both he and the Hangman were frankly more interesting than the Shield and Inferno, or even the Fox, although I did like the Fox story. The Shield tried hard to differentiate himself from Captain America, but while I think they did the best they could, as comparisons between the two have always been inevitable, his military adventures just didn't do it for me, and I think they tried too hard to shoehorn too many characters in to prove that this was a relevant comic book, even though ultimately it turned out not to be. And while Inferno's mystery had promised, the book ended before they could ever give any answers, and given the licensing issues, it's a good bet we're never really going to get any. The Fox had a better story, but by the time his origin story was over, the Red Circle project was over also. So while he did appear in the Crusaders comic, and I'll talk about that in a minute, his story ultimately didn't feel like it had much impact. The Web, with its main character of a spoiled rich boy trying to become a better person and often misstepping along the way, while taking an interesting approach to crime fighting, and the Hangman with his unique backstory and darker tone, just made for more appealing characters with more interesting stories to tell out of them. However, these books were both short-lived, as both The Web and The Shield only lasted 10 issues. And while both were advertised as the final issue, it was clear they got cut short with the current stories all wrapping up, but not in a way that screamed final resolution. And Inferno, who as I mentioned had his backup feature briefly taken over by the Fox, was initially advertised to return as a backup with issue 11, but as we saw, that never happened, as there turned out to never be an issue 11. DC did try to continue the characters, launching a miniseries called Mighty Crusaders. The Crusaders were originally a superhero team published by Archie Comics, featuring several of their superheroes teaming up together to form a superhero team. DC followed suit with a special, immediately followed by a 6-issue miniseries of the Mighty Crusaders. This featured the Shield, the Web, Inferno, Hangman, the Comet, War Eagle, and Fly Girl. However, the Fox and Jaguar did later join the team before the miniseries ended. And in a continued attempt to establish these characters as part of the DC universe, the Golden Age Airwave, the Western hero El Diablo, and the Golden Age Green Lantern did also appear in the special this series was launched by, albeit very briefly. While the miniseries very much implied we would see this team and the characters again, but that ended up never happening, as none of these characters were ever seen or mentioned in DC Comics again after the miniseries ended. In 2011, DC Comics officially announced that they no longer had the rights to the characters, and with that, the experiment was over before it barely even had a chance to begin. Sadly, this is possibly the least successful attempt to revive the characters, as while none have really taken the comics world by fire, including their most recent attempt by Archie Comics under the Dark Circle imprint, this was definitely the most short-lived, and has gone on to become almost completely forgotten, except by hardcore fans of Archie superheroes. While those sales are likely the main reason for its short run, DC really did try to do something ambitious with this title. Putting them in the main DC universe gave potential for them to get a level of visibility and importance they not really had since their original run in the 40s. But I do tend to wonder how far they would have actually taken it. I mean, with DC not owning the characters, things like having S.H.I.E.L.D. join the JSA, or putting them as major players in a crossover, could have made for future reprints of these stories tricky. And while I don't know how the rights issued work, it's possible that that would have been tricky once DC gave up the rights to the characters, which might have kept them from ever truly integrating them. It's also possible with the milestone characters taking over their spots in Brave and the Bold, that DC decided to invest more in integrating their own characters from other imprints into the bigger picture, rather than giving these spots to characters they didn't own, although all of this is just my speculation. As far as I've been able to find, none of these series were ever released in trade paperback format, and short of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s appearances in Green Arrow, Black Canary, and Wonder Woman, which can both be found on Comixology and in DC Universe Infinite, none of these series are available digitally as of this recording, which is likely part of the reason that these series have become forgotten like they have. Ordinarily, no one has ever truly gone in DC Comics. DC always likes to, every once in a blue moon or so, bring a forgotten character out for at least a brief appearance, but given these characters only happen due to licensing rights DC no longer has, it's extremely unlikely any of these characters will ever appear again, and quite frankly, there's really no demand to see them again. But for one shining moment, the heroes of MLJ Comics got to play in the big boys' sandbox. And that's not nothing. What are your feelings about these characters, or about the Archie superheroes in general? Do you think if given the opportunity, DC should give them another chance? Do you wish these characters would return? What's your favorite reimagining of Archie Comics superheroes? Let me know in the comments below, and if you like this video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share the video. I'm Dan the Man, and I'll see you next time.